saw the subject matter of the USACC group build, I thought this might be a pretty interesting challenge for me. I had the kit in stock, which had basically been left for dead because I only wanted the wheels out of it for this 67 Dodge Charger Daytona project I built more than a decade ago. I even used the body for a color test way back then. It even had the tape still attached inside the body. The rest of the kit was untouched. Now another set of wheels started to turn about what I could do with it, but there was one large hurdle. This kit is 24 scale, and I really prefer building in 25th scale. I started watching everyone's videos about what they were planning to do, and that got me motivated. To crack this egg, I broke out the panel scriber and removed the molded in firewall and fender wells. Whatever would happen next, I knew those would not be included in the process. While cutting, I started to think what would be the best kit out there to bash this Roadrunner body with. The first thing that came to mind is a monogram NASCAR chassis. There was one problem with that. The 80s NASCAR chassis is a 110-inch wheelbase, and the Roadrunner has a 116-inch wheelbase. An obvious solution would be to stretch the chassis to preserve the Roadrunner's factory proportions. But then one of my favorite cars came to mind. Roadkill's NASCARlo. NASCARlo is so ugly and weird, it oozes cool. One of the main reasons it was built this way was for insurance and registration purposes because a race car does not have a VIN. The body swap allowed the car to be registered to be driven on the street. So I did a quick Photoshop of what a Roadrunner would look like if I took a similar approach of adjusting the body to fit the chassis. This looked completely doable. I even considered using the monogram ASA race car chassis for an even shorter wheelbase. It was determined that chassis required too much work to include a passenger seat, which I felt this model needed. The next step was to plan the surgery. Where the Roadrunner's side scoop would wind up was a major consideration. The trunk lid is fairly long and flat, so most of the shortening would happen there. After being marked, I cut the quarters off and sectioned 6 inches out of the trunk lid and the doors. After that, I turned my attention to the front. I always liked how racers dropped the front fenders and felt that was a must on this build. I cut the grille surround off of the body to have access to where I would pie cut the front fenders. 2 scale inches were taken out in a wedge, then the tops of the fenders were bent down and re-glued. I then reattached the grille surround. With most of that serious surgery out of the way, I searched for proper wheels and tires. I wanted some treaded dirt track tires that could loosely pass for street tires. Ron Kuhn Resins had exactly what I was looking for. His products list the dimensions of each tire so I could compare his tires to what I had in stock to get a set within the ballpark I was playing in. Once the size was determined, it was time to make them fit. To keep some shape of the Roadrunner wheel wells, I decided to completely remove them from the body, then move them up about 4 scale inches. This allowed the tires to tuck in and set the stance I was looking for. All along this process, I tried to make most of the cuts as careful as possible so body filler would be kept to a minimum. After the typical sand prime, this model was starting to look pretty racy. At this point, I was now wanting to put as much Roadrunner back into it as I could. I was surprised how nicely the Roadrunner's 440 fit into the NASCAR chassis. A parts box 4-barrel intake was used because a 6-pack didn't seem appropriate here. I also envisioned a big round air cleaner sticking out of the hood. The 440 and the NASCAR small block share similar exhaust port configurations, so I modified the NASCAR headers to fit the 440 mainly out of ease because I knew they would fit the chassis. The oil pan had to be converted to a rear sump to clear the front crossmember. The door bars were a bit much for this application, so they were removed much like what was done on NASCARlo. I also used some evergreen plastic to fill the area around the fuel cell to close up the gaps between the body and the chassis. Turning to the interior, the race car dash was considered until I tried the stock Roadrunner dash, and it snapped in like it was designed for it. I was also considering several seating options, until I thought it would be fun to just put the bench seat back in. The irony of a bench seat in a race car seemed amusing. I separated the headrest, then wondered if the stock door panels would fit where the door bars once were. They fit like a glove. Something I knew would be very visible on the finished model was the package tray, seen through the back window. I found a photo online of a factory replacement panel and carved the kit part to look more that part. Another area that needed carving was opening up the side scoop. I also carved out the marker light openings because race car. The rear door line was rescribed to align with the door cards. I wanted to do something custom to the grille to create a modern Hellcat feel. First was drilling out the headlight buckets, then drilling out the center. Next, a Dremel, some files, and emery boards helped clean up the opening. I added a strip of evergreen above the headlight openings to add a sense of anger. The headlights are some parts box velocity stacks, tubing, and lenses painted to simulate modern Challenger lights. Photo etch screen was used for the grills. I removed the center of the bumper as well and screened it. The driving lights were added back, cut from aluminum tube. This concludes part 1 of this build. If you think this is heading in the right direction, be sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Next time, I'll reveal the finished model and share many of the techniques used to complete it. I don't think it'll disappoint. And remember, I have all kinds of model car stories to tell. Thanks for watching.
Meep meep.